On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, how do I come off the Freddie Mac Exclusionary List?
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, and this podcast is brought to you by my law firm, Yesner Law. One of the things that I've talked about often on my podcast, one of the things I've blogged about is the Freddie Mac Exclusionary List. And interestingly, the way that this thing started was I was preparing for a seminar for Realtors on how they could avoid liability in certain situations. And in doing my research, I stumbled across something called the Freddie Mac Exclusionary List. And what I could tell was that it was a list that if Freddie Mac thinks that you've done something that causes you to create a unsaleable or non-investment quality loan, they put you on this list. And the significance of being on this list is that you are no longer allowed to participate in any Freddie Mac transactions, whether you're the buyer, the seller, if you're the realtor, if you're the mortgage originator, the appraiser, the inspector, the title company, the attorney. It doesn't matter. If you're on this list, you're not allowed to participate in a Freddie Mac transaction, or a transaction where Freddie Mac is also a party. I've had this happen where a buyer was going to buy a house, and the mortgage broker ran the buyer through Freddie Mac's program. The buyer was connected to an LLC that had invested in property and allegedly did some improper short sale flips. And so the company and all the owners of the company, including this buyer, were put on the Freddie Mac list. And so Freddie Mac said, no, we're not even going to loan money to this buyer because they're on the Freddie Mac list. Well, I did this presentation to the Realtors, and I had a videographer friend of mine who I paid capture all the raw footage, and then we cut all that raw footage into 2 and 3 minute video clips. And if you go to my YouTube page and you search for the Freddie Mac list, it's probably the second most popular video on my page, next to the rant I went on about Aquin. But if you look for the Freddie Mac video, I describe my findings. And so I had somebody call me after reviewing that video and said, I'm on the list. How do I come off? Well, I'd never really considered that. And so we talked about it, and I gave him what I thought was some common sense advice. And he called me back. He said, thank you very much. I wrote a letter just like you said, and I got off the list. And I thought, why don't I charge to write these letters? And so the next person that called, I said, yeah, I charge, X amount of dollars, and I'll write you a letter, and I'll submit some supporting evidence, and we'll get you off the list. And they hired me, and I did it, and I got them off the list. In fact, I got 9 or 10 people off of the list before I got my first rejection. And interestingly, in that rejection, I said to the guy before we sent off the letter, I don't think we have enough here. And, of course, Freddie Mac came and denied our request to get him off the list. Now, the interesting thing is, in a denial or in an approval, Freddie Mac doesn't say what it is that they liked that got them off the list or what it was they disliked, why they're staying on the list. Freddie Mac just sends a letter that says, thank you for your recent inquiry, you're still on the list. Or thank you for your recent inquiry, we're taking you off the list as of such and such date. But they don't give us reasons, so we got to guess. And so part of the process here, and part of the way that I've priced myself is I use the experience of what has been successful with other clients to say that I think I can get someone off the list, or I think I can't get someone off the list. Of course, I can't guarantee anything, and each fact pattern is different, and so who knows. But what I thought I'd do is do a quick podcast episode, and I did a blog post about this as well. And my blog post, if you go to yesnerlaw.com and you click on the blog tab, this was from May 9 of 2018 is this blog post, but I think it's still relevant. And so here are some of the things that I've used to help people come off the list. I mean, obviously I write a letter, and my letter talks about the good things that the person on the list has done and all the lessons that they've learned and why they should come off the list. But if you have a policy manual that talks about your policies in creating loans if you're a loan originator, or if you have a policy manual as a realtor, about how to make sure your clients are getting good loans, or you have a policy manual on how to avoid flips and subject twos and all that kind of stuff. Or if you're an inspector and you have a policy manual, what is your policy manual? What things do you have? What written documentations and processes and procedures do you have in the office that talk about how you protect the investors, the loans that are being created based on your participation in the real estate transaction? One of the other things that I've submitted in some cases has been a job description. So what do you do in your job description? What are the points in your job description? Can you be terminated for creating non-investment quality loans? Those types of things. I've used letters of recommendation from superiors, letters of recommendation from clients, letters of recommendation from others in the industry. So if you're a mortgage originator, can you get letters of recommendation from realtors, from other mortgage people, from title companies? If you're appraisers, can you get letters of recommendation from realtors and inspectors and title companies? Will you have your clients submit letters? I once had a client who had his clients send letters that said, we don't care that such and such realtor is on the Freddie Mac list. We are still going to use him for our investment purposes. And Freddie Mac, if you don't want to let us use him, then we're not going to buy your properties. Now, again, I don't know if that was the straw that tilted everything in favor of my client, or if Freddie Mac even cares about that. But threatening to hit Freddie Mac in the pocketbook, they gave us an approval letter. Now, again, I don't know if the two are related at all, but they gave us an approval letter on that one. One of the other things that I use is certificates from continuing education, especially if you've taught continuing education. So in my business, I do speaking engagements from time to time that give other practicing attorneys continuing legal education. So I would submit those certificates that I have completed or received or taught at those different seminars. And especially if that continuing education speaks to whatever the reason was that you got put on the list. Definitely try to do that type of education so you can tell Freddie Mac you are trying to learn what it was that got you on the list so you can avoid getting on the list again. Are there any public record documents? Are there any public record documents? So if you own a corporation or an LLC that was put on the list, let's pull documents from that corporation or LLC. What other types of public record documents can we show to prove that you should come off the list? Any other relevant documents? Now, I've learned, in addition to all of that stuff, there's even more stuff that can be submitted. So one of the great things that a former client of mine did was they created an affidavit. And the affidavit went through in detail why they should not be on the list, what they've done to prove that they are not a, quote, threat to Freddie Mac, and what they've done to come off the list. And I think that affidavit was really powerful. Again, I don't know, but I thought that affidavit, at least as I was reading it and reviewing it and editing it, I thought it was really powerful. And so I've started to include a similar type of affidavit in all my cases. Obviously fact-specific, obviously tied to the specific case at hand, but affidavits describing the situation, describing why this person should not be on the list and what they did to come off the list, what they did to learn right from wrong, quote, right from wrong, with regard to Freddie Mac. Other cases, I've attached a resume or a CV, a curriculum vitae, and submitted that resume in support of the petition to come off the list. I had one client submit a YouTube video, a promotional video that she used for her business. And so we submitted that YouTube video to Freddie Mac as a promotional item, promoting the virtues of this particular realtor. Do you have any social media promotions? Do you have any social media commercials? Do you have any social media testimonials? Obviously, we can include those types of things as well. Did you win any awards in your industry? If so, do you have proof of the awards that you won within your industry? Top agent, top producer, those types of awards, maybe best in the business type of awards, community service awards, anything like that. We can send proof of that to Freddie Mac. Again, proof of community involvement. Are you involved with your religious organization? Are you involved with a homeowner association or condo association? Are you on the board of a charitable organization? Let's show Freddie Mac that you are a good person and you support your community. If I were to ever find myself on the list, I would probably say how I coach soccer for the West Chase Community Association, how I coached basketball for 7 and 8 year old kids at the YMCA, how I coach soccer for 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and 6 and 7-year-olds for West Chase. What other things have you done for your community? A great idea from another client of mine was to submit a credit report or some type of other proof of financial responsibility. In other words, show Freddie Mac that you're not out for every dime you can rub together, but you're actually considering your clients and considering the impact on the Freddie Mac loans that you are creating. And so you could also submit a credit report or other proof of financial responsibility. One of my very first bosses, actually my very first boss in the legal field, is an immigration attorney. And so for those of you that don't know, I practiced immigration law for about 2 or 3 years. Mostly it was business type visas, H-1B worker visas, L visas, which are executive level visas, a couple of O visas, which are performer visas. Those are really fun. And one of the things that he always used to say in connection with the submission of a immigration petition or an immigration package, does it pass the weight test? Now, what he meant was, have we submitted enough supporting documentation that INS is going to look at this thing one time and approve it? And I think in every case that I can recall, we did. I don't recall that my boss, my former boss, ever got an immigration petition denied because he made sure everything was thorough, everything was complete. And I think we need to take that same approach when we're talking about Freddie Mac. Make sure everything is thorough, make sure everything is complete, make sure everything is appropriate. And I think, although again, I can't say for sure, the thicker the package, the more documentation that we can submit in support of the request to come off the list, the higher the likelihood that someone will actually come off the list. So that's it for this week's episode. If you find yourself on the Freddie Mac Exclusionary List, please reach out to me. If you are a mortgage originator and you're doing a closing and you find that someone is on that list, point them to this podcast, point them to my website, point them to my YouTube channel, and have them review all the Freddie Mac information that I've been accumulating here over the last couple of years. I do have a good track record. Now, the Florida Bar won't allow me to say that I have a percentage success rate because that invokes in the mind of the listener that I might be able to achieve a result that I might not otherwise be able to achieve. And I will readily admit that I have had some people that I've submitted the letter and Freddie Mac has said no and has refused to take them off the list. So I have had a couple of denials. And I did a podcast episode about what I thought the approvals and the denials all shared in common. But if you know someone who is on the list, or if you know a mortgage originator, they know who's on the list, point them to this podcast episode, point them to my blog, point them to my YouTube channel, and have them call me. It doesn't matter what state you're in. I've represented people all over the country in trying to get off the Freddie Mac list. So it doesn't matter where you're located. I can take a look at your situation and I can help you. So that's it for this week's episode. Again, we'd love to connect with you on social media. If you enjoy the content of the show, I would really request that you rate us and review us. That's how Apple Podcast likes us, is if we get ratings and reviews. So I'd really appreciate it. If you like the content, you think it's worth it, to give it a 5-star review and a good testimonial. But that is it for this week's content, and I look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.